When Married with Children first hit television screens, nobody gave it a fighting chance. Critics panned it from day one. But the audience? They could not get enough. Week after week, the Bundy family turned chaos into comedy gold, and soon the show had become one of the most talked-about series of its era. The cast clicked in a way you could feel in every scene. But the real shock has always lived off camera. Pay cuts, wild auditions, jokes that nearly got cut, scenes accidentally saved, and one truth Ed kept quiet for years. He has now finally explained what most fans never figured out. And in January 2026, the cast did something that made the whole world remember why this show mattered. They reunited live on stage for the first time in over a decade. Join us as we revisit the show, the cast, the chaos, and the secrets of the series that broke the mold. Married with Children launched on April 5, 1987, and ran until June 9, 1997. It was created by Michael G. Moye and Ron Levitt for the brand new Fox network, and holds the distinction of being Fox's very first prime-time series. It also became the longest-running live-action sitcom in Fox history, delivering 11 seasons and 259 episodes. 2 unaired episodes later surfaced on June 9, 1997, and June 18, 2002, adding to a legacy that never really stopped growing. The story was set in Chicago and followed a loud, messy family that laughed at pain and pushed buttons on purpose. This was not a clean, wholesome sitcom. That was entirely the point. The working title was not The Cosbys. The message was direct. Do the opposite of the perfect TV family. Fox executives told creators Moye and Levitt to be as outrageous as they could possibly be, to try things the major networks would never allow. Not everyone inside Fox felt certain about the experiment. CEO Barry Diller had his doubts. Critics were sharply divided. The humor was bold, sexual, and unapologetically loud. Yet viewers kept tuning in because the show felt real in a twisted, funny way. The theme song Love and Marriage by Sammy Cahn and Jimmy Van Heusen, performed by Frank Sinatra, added one joke layered on top of another. It sounded warm and classic, while the family on screen did everything but play nice. That clash made the show stand out from its very first broadcast. The more people watched, the more they noticed the small things that kept the laughs coming. And that leads us right into the people who made the chaos sing. Al Bundy, played by Ed O'Neill, was the beating heart of the show. Al called it the Bundy curse. He was a former high school football star reduced to selling women's shoes for a living. His proudest achievement was scoring 4 touchdowns in a single game for Polk High. He clung to that memory because almost nothing good seemed to follow it. He hated his job and his bills, but he loved a small collection of things: watching Psycho Dad, hoarding issues of his favorite magazine, holding on to his battered 1972 Dodge Dart with over 1 million miles on it. Al complained constantly, but he always showed up to defend his family when it truly mattered. Peggy Bundy, played by Katie Sagal, was the irreverent, red-haired wife who refused to cook, clean, or hold down a job. She lived for daytime television and spending Al's paycheck before he could. Her best friend was neighbor Marcy, and the two of them together usually made Al's day considerably worse. Kelly Bundy, played by Christina Applegate, was the pretty but hopelessly scatterbrained daughter who forgot information at an alarming rate, dated boys who drove Al up the wall, and kept the family drama at a constant boil. Bud Bundy, played by David Faustino, was the younger sibling, smarter than Kelly, but perpetually unlucky when it came to romantic pursuits. Kelly and Bud mocked each other relentlessly, yet they showed up for one another when the chaos peaked. That mix of bitterness and loyalty made the Bundys feel recognizably human. They were petty, rude, funny, and unpredictable. The next scene could always turn in any direction. Marcy Rhodes, later Marcy Darcy, played by Amanda Burse, was the neighbor who never stopped fighting with Al. She was a banker, a feminist, and an environmentalist who founded Fang Feminists against Neanderthal guys. Al fired back with his own men's group, No Ma'am, the National Organization of Men Against Amazonian Masterhood. Their battles were constant, sharp, and often brilliantly timed. Marcy's first husband, Steve Rhodes, played by David Garrison, was a stiff banker who prized his Mercedes-Benz above almost everything else, including his marriage. The two drifted apart over time, and Steve left in season 4 to become a forest ranger at Yosemite National Park. He returned briefly in the Egg and I episode, trying to reclaim his old life, but Jefferson had already stepped into the picture. Marcy's second husband, Jefferson Darcy, played by Ted McGinley, was a smooth-talking charmer with no visible income and hints scattered throughout several episodes that he may have once worked for the CIA. Unlike the buttoned-up Steve, Jefferson was lazy, fun, and somehow became one of Al's closest friends. The neighbor drama gave every episode a second battlefield. Al and Marcy argued about money, gender, power, and pride. Kelly and Bud lobbed jokes from the sidelines. Peggy and Marcy stirred the pot with obvious glee. It was designed to feel messy, and it delivered every single week. The first 2 seasons were taped in front of a live studio audience at the ABC Television Center in the Los Feliz neighborhood of Los Angeles. Real laughter in the room sharpened the performers' timing in ways that a laugh track simply could not replicate. Seasons 3 through 8 moved production to Sunset Gower Studios in Hollywood. Seasons 9 through 11 relocated again to Sony Pictures Studios in Culver City. These transitions did not slow the creative engine. They helped the show evolve and stay fresh through an unusually long run. The production also changed corporate hands. The series began at Embassy Communications. Midway through season 2, ELP Communications under Columbia Pictures Television took over. The machine behind the camera was always in motion, and that steady momentum kept the Bundys on the air for a full decade. In 2008, long after the final episode aired, Married with Children landed at number 94 on Entertainment Weekly's list of new TV classics. The Bundys still mattered. In May 2022, news broke that Sony Pictures Television had been quietly developing an animated revival for over a year, waiting until they had closed deals with the original cast before shopping the project to networks and streamers. As recently as 2023, Christina Applegate confirmed in a Vanity Fair interview that she, O'Neill, Sagal, and Faustino remained attached to the revival project. And then, in January 2026, something even more immediate happened. For the first time in years, Ed O'Neill, Katie Sagal, Christina Applegate, and David Faustino reunited live on one stage for an evening with the Bundys. The Married with Children cast reunion at the Wiltern Theater in Los Angeles on January 28, 2026. Icon vs. Icon. During the event, the 4 actors talked about working on the show and shared backstage stories, as well as how they still connect with each other nearly 30 years after the show ended. Show writer and producer Richard Gurman was also brought out to discuss the writing and rehearsal process and share his thoughts on the creators, Ron Levitt and Michael G. Moya. Fandom. A portion of the ticket proceeds went to Race to Erase Miss, an organization dedicated to the treatment, research, and ultimate cure of multiple sclerosis. The disease Christina Applegate was diagnosed with in 2021. The Wiltern, the reunion confirmed something. The ratings always suggested this show still has a hold on people that few sitcoms from any era can match. When Married with Children first aired in 1987, critical reception was anything but welcoming. The first season carried a Metacritic score of 58 out of 100, squarely in mixed territory. Howard Rosenberg of the Los Angeles Times praised the casting of the Bundy family and felt the dynamic worked, but found the supporting Rhodes characters underdeveloped and warned that the satire was heavy-handed. Tom Shales of The Washington Post looked at the same pilot and called it overacted and poorly cast. John J. O'Connor of The New York Times described the series as loud and coarse, comparing it to older programs like All in the Family, while making clear he considered Married with Children far beneath that standard. These early reviews painted a consistent portrait. Critics thought the show was rough, cheap, and offensive. But while they pointed fingers, audiences found something funny and recognizable in the Bundys, and that grassroots audience loyalty became the show's greatest weapon. Behind-the-scenes accounts pulled back the curtain on some of the most chaotic moments in the show's production. One of the most disruptive figures to ever walk onto the set was comedian and actor Sam Kinison. He was already famous in the 1980s for being outrageously unpredictable, and he appeared in season 4 as a guardian angel. Though he was only around for 2 episodes, he left a permanent mark on everyone who worked there. Show writer Richard Gurman documented just how disruptive Kinison could be. On his very first day, Sam mooned the entire cast and crew. On the second day, he arrived late and tried to make amends by bringing strippers to set, who actually served lunch to the cast and crew and turned the workplace into a genuine circus. The tension between Kinison and director Jerry Cohen escalated to something truly frightening. At one point, Sam produced a firearm and threatened Jerry directly, fueled in part by suspicions over a personal matter that had spilled onto the set. Gurman later wrote that Sam's attention-getting behavior provided some eye-opening examples of what working with him on a regular basis would have looked like. Kinison was, at one point, actually considered for the role of Al Bundy, just as Roseanne Barr was floated as a candidate for Peggy. But in the end, Ed O'Neill and Katie Sagal took those parts. Creator Michael Moye later admitted he was relieved, explaining that comedians come in with a character already built, and there would have been fighting constantly over creative control. The cast they ended up with was the cast that could keep the show steady, even when scripts and guest stars pushed hard against the boundaries. From almost the moment it aired, Married with Children was controversial. Its humor about sex, domestic dysfunction, and bad behavior sparked genuine outrage. One of the loudest critics was a woman named Terry Rakolta from Michigan, who caught an episode with her children that included jokes she found deeply offensive. She began appearing on talk shows, calling for a boycott, and reached out to Fox directly. At one point, she was connected with show writer Marcy Vosberg. The two got into a heated argument, and Vosberg told her that if she found the show so insulting, she had the freedom to change the channel. Rakolta later admitted she had assumed she was talking to a Fox executive, not a writer. The boycott, rather than hurting the series, gave it a massive boost. People who had never watched the show tuned in specifically to see what all the fuss was about. The negative attention became free advertising, and the raunchy, provocative style that had caused the uproar became the very signature that made Married with Children different from every other sitcom of its era. The new book about the show also revealed that, when Ed O'Neill was first approached about auditioning, his own agents told him it was a terrible show on a dubious new network. O'Neill read the script anyway and fell in love with it. Christina Applegate admitted that her first reaction to the script was disgust, but, after watching the pilot, she came around completely. Even the actors who would eventually make the show iconic had to be persuaded it was worth their time. For years, fans assumed the Married with Children cast was one big family, both on and off screen. Ed O'Neill shattered that assumption in an interview in January 2024, when he appeared on Jesse Tyler Ferguson's podcast, Dinner's on Me, and admitted to a long-running feud with Amanda Bearse, who played neighbor Marcy. The conflict traced back to a TV guide cover shoot. Only the core family cast O'Neill, Sagal, Applegate, and Faustino had been cleared for the cover. Bearse and David Garrison, who played Steve Rhodes, were told they could not be included. They came out of their dressing rooms together and asked Ed, as the show's lead, to go to co-creator Ron Levitt and demand that the full cast appear. Ed refused. He told them bluntly that they were lucky to have gotten the cover at all, and that he was not going to fight a battle. He did not believe they could win. Amanda and David were hurt. The feud that followed lasted years, and by 2010, the rift had deepened to the point where O'Neill lashed out publicly when Bearse did not invite him to her wedding. O'Neill now says he regrets the way he handled it. He has said he should have at least appeared to go to bat for his co-stars, even if the outcome was unlikely to change. What started as a disagreement over magazine real estate became one of the most bitter personal divisions in a cast that millions believed was warmly united. While fans saw the Bundy family as funny and endearing, the stars described a behind-the-scenes environment that could be sharp and uncomfortable. Katie Sagal, speaking openly on her podcast with her husband Kurt Sutter, admitted the cast was a sarcastic, cynical group where no one had their back guaranteed. Christina Applegate joined that conversation and described overhearing people talking about her on the set monitor while she was only steps away. For a teenage actress early in her career, that experience left scars she carried for a long time. Applegate later opened up about how the show affected her during those years. Playing Kelly Bundy, she said, did things to her psychologically that were damaging, and it pushed her into a serious eating disorder, anorexia, that she kept entirely private at the time. She described hiding in airplane bathrooms just to eat without being seen, consumed by shame and a constant fear of judgment. She has said she was in a genuinely dark place during those years. Segal has spoken about the broader environment on set, noting that Applegate bore particular scrutiny as the show's young sex symbol, dressed in progressively shorter skirts and pushed into a tight box from the moment the show began. Applegate herself has pointed out that the visual reinvention of Kelly Bundy was actually her own idea. The original version of the character was written as a tough biker girl, and Applegate pushed for a different vision inspired by the rock video culture of the moment. She went to the wardrobe department herself and drove the change. But that creative ownership did not insulate her from the pressures that came with the territory. Ed O'Neill spent 11 seasons as Al Bundy and came away with a clear-eyed understanding of what the show meant to its audience. Speaking on the Dinners on Me podcast, he described a consistent pattern in how fans approached him. People would say he reminded them of their brother, their uncle, their father, or their best friend. "Not once," he noted with a laugh, "did anyone ever say he reminded them of themselves. Al Bundy was funny to watch from a safe distance. Nobody wanted to admit they lived like him." O'Neill also acknowledged that Hollywood never truly embraced the show. Despite 11 seasons, massive ratings, and a devoted fanbase, the awards never came, and the critical respect largely stayed out of reach. He said simply that the show was a success but was not respected by his peers. The industry looked the other way while the audience kept watching. That gap between popular love and professional recognition was the quiet reality O'Neill carried through the entire run. Ed O'Neill found out Married with Children had been canceled in the most impersonal way imaginable. Not from the network, not from a producer, but from a stranger. He was back in his home state of Ohio, staying at a small bed and breakfast, when a newly married couple pulled in. The groom recognized him immediately. The bride expressed condolences. O'Neill had no idea what she meant. The groom told him it was on the radio. The show was canceled. O'Neill had just learned from a man in a tuxedo he had never met before that 10 years of his life had come to an end. He stayed. He had champagne with the newlyweds. He told them he was glad to hear from them. Christina Applegate found out through a similarly impersonal chain. Someone who knew someone who worked for her assistant passed along the news. Fox never called. There was no final meeting, no personal note, no rap gift. O'Neill later noted that the Golden Girls had received Mercedes-Benzes when their show ended. The Bundys received silence. Fox publicly announced the cancellation before informing the cast and crew, meaning most of them found out from fans and low-level employees rather than from network executives. Katie Sagal stated that she constantly felt the series had been neglected by Fox, despite helping bring the fledgling network to prominence, having been on the air even before The Simpsons. Wikipedia. The pain of how it ended sat alongside the joy of what it gave. That is the picture Ed O'Neill and his castmates have painted across years of interviews, a hit that people still watch, a goodbye that never felt like one, and a truth about television fame that does not always come packaged with respect. But nearly 3 decades later, the Bundys stood on a stage in Los Angeles together, and 4,000 people packed the Wiltern to hear the stories that never made it to air. Some shows get canceled and fade. The Bundys got canceled, kept going in syndication, spawned an animated revival deal, and then filled a theater just by showing up. Whatever Ed O'Neill's peers thought of the show, the audience never moved on. And honestly, neither have we. What do you think? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more incredible stories from Hollywood's fascinating history. See you next time.